They let us eat until full.
More?
August 1944. A prisoner of war camp in the American Midwest. Morning air hangs heavy over the barracks. Dust clings to boots. Somewhere nearby, a kitchen door opens. Metal clatters. Steam rises. 12 German women stand in line, thin enough that their uniforms no longer hold shape. They have been told what capture means. Hunger, humiliation, work until collapse. That is what they are ready for. Then the smell reaches them. Bread, hot, real. Coffee, dark and bitter. Something boiling that does not smell like soup stretched too far. A tray is placed in front of the first woman, then another, and another. No shouting. No rationing. No signal to stop. A guard looks down the line and asks a question none of them expected to hear. More? Why were enemies being fed like this? What happened next would stay with them longer than the war itself. For most of 1944, these women had lived inside warnings. Radio voices, posters, training sessions that repeated the same message until it felt physical. If captured by Americans, you would be starved. If you were a woman, worse things would happen. Kindness was a lie used before punishment. They had believed it because belief was safer than doubt. Doubt required hope, and hope was dangerous. By the time they reached the American camp, hunger was already part of their bodies, not sharp anymore, familiar, a background ache. They knew how to manage it. Eat slowly. Leave a little behind. Never trust the first meal. That knowledge had kept them alive, which is why what happened next made no sense. The camp itself looked ordinary. Barbed wire, guard towers, gravel paths worn smooth by boots. But the rhythm felt wrong. No screaming, no rush. Guards moved like men on schedules, not like hunters. The women were counted, listed, directed toward the mess hall. Inside, the air was thick with heat. Steam drifted up from metal pots. The smell was immediate. Bread and something fatty. Meat, maybe. Real meat. Their bodies reacted before their minds did. Saliva, lightheadedness, a tightening low in the stomach. They fought it. This is a setup, one woman told herself. This is the first stage. Trays were handed out, heavy ones. Bread on the side, a ladle of stew, another scoop without comment. No one explained the rules. That absence mattered. In Germany, food always came with rules. Who first? How much? Who watched? Here, there was only sequence. Tray after tray. The women sat stiffly, hands on their laps, waiting for the correction. It did not come. The first bite felt wrong. Too soft, too warm. Eating it felt like stealing. They chewed carefully, eyes down, listening for a shout. None came. A guard leaned against the wall, sipping coffee. Another adjusted his belt. They were not watching plates. They were watching time. One woman stopped halfway through her portion. Her stomach was already full enough to frighten her. She waited for someone to notice. No one did. Across the table, another woman finished everything, quickly, before it could be taken away. Her hands shook when she set the tray down. She waited for punishment. Instead, the guard returned with the pot. He did not look at her face. He did not ask why. He simply tilted the ladle again. Being allowed to eat until full should not have happened. Not here. Not to them. Everything they knew said abundance was reserved for the victorious. The Reich itself had taught them that. Rations shrinking month by month. Civilians trained to accept less. Soldiers praised for endurance, not comfort. Hunger had become proof of loyalty. And now, inside enemy wire, loyalty was no longer required. That absence was destabilizing. The women did not speak during the meal. Speaking would have made it real. They focused on physical details instead. The weight of the tray. The heat through thin metal. The sound of bread tearing. Those details grounded them when belief failed. When the meal ended, no one was hurried out. The women sat longer than necessary, unsure what came next. A guard cleared his throat. "Done?" he asked casually. Some nodded. Some did not. "All right," he said. "Bring the trays up when you're ready." Ready. The word followed them back to the barracks. That night, none of them slept well. Their stomachs were full for the first time in months. Their minds were not. Because if this was real, if being allowed to eat until full was not a trick, then something else was also true. They had been lied to. And the next day, it happened again. The second serving came without ceremony. No announcement. No change in tone. Just the same ladle, moving again. The woman closest to the aisle had already eaten half her stew when the cook returned. He did not ask. He did not look at her face. He simply tipped the pot and added more. Her shoulders tightened. Instinct told her to pull the tray closer. Another instinct told her to push it away. Neither felt safe. Being allowed to eat until full was not something her body recognized yet. Around the table, the other women watched closely. Not the food, the hand holding the ladle. It did not hesitate. In Germany, hesitation meant scarcity. A pause meant the pot was empty, or about to be. Here, the pot stayed heavy. The women ate in small bites, counted them without realizing it, chewed longer than necessary, as if slowing the moment could make it less dangerous. One woman stopped early. Her stomach was warm. Her head felt light. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Nothing happened. The guards leaned against the wall. One scratched his neck. Another adjusted his cap. The room smelled of bread and steam, an ordinary smell. That was what made it unsettling. Extraordinary cruelty could be prepared for. Ordinary abundance could not. The woman who had stopped eating stared at the bread on her tray. White, soft, still warm. She thought of her mother at home, cutting slices thinner each week, not out of fairness, but necessity, measuring with her eyes because scales had been sold. She pushed the bread aside. A guard noticed. "Not hungry?" he asked, without suspicion. She nodded, unsure if that was the correct answer. He shrugged. "If you want it later, it'll still be here." Still be here. The sentence stayed with her longer than the meal. Back in the barracks, the women spoke quietly. No one accused anyone of eating too much. No one joked. They compared sensations instead. My hands stopped shaking. I slept. My head didn't hurt. They did not say thank you. Gratitude felt premature, like admitting something had changed. They waited for correction. The next morning, breakfast was the same. Oatmeal, bread, coffee that smelled burnt but strong. Again, being allowed to eat until full. One woman tested it. She finished everything, every spoonful, every crumb. Her body tensed, waiting for consequence. Nothing came. The realization did not bring relief. It brought unease. If this was real, then the stories they had been told were wrong. And if those were wrong, then something larger had failed. During work detail, one woman bent to lift a crate and noticed she could stand without dizziness. Another realized she was no longer rationing her breath. Strength returned quietly, without permission. At lunch, the second serving appeared again. This time, fewer hands pulled back. The women began to recognize the pattern. Trays down. Food served. Silence. Second serving offered. No reaction. Being allowed to eat until full was not framed as kindness. It was routine. That was the most disturbing part. Kindness could be debated. Routine could not. One woman folded her napkin carefully, and placed it beside her tray, a habit from before the war. The gesture surprised her. Old manners were returning. That night, guilt finally found words. If I am full, someone else is not. The thought did not stop her from eating the next day. It only slowed her. She took less on the third morning, more on the fourth. Her body argued faster than her conscience. By the end of the week, the meal no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a fact. And facts were harder to fight. On the seventh day, the same guard passed the table and asked the same question. More? This time, one woman answered without looking up. Yes. The word felt heavier than she expected. Being allowed to eat until full had crossed a line. And the next day, it happened again. By the second week, hunger stopped being loud. It did not disappear. It learned the schedule. Morning, midday, evening. That frightened them more than starvation ever had. Because hunger that follows rules suggests trust. And trust had been trained out of them. The meals kept coming. Not larger. Not celebrated. Just consistent. Being allowed to eat until full was no longer an event. It was a condition. The women began to notice details they had ignored before. The weight of the tray, when it was first handed over, heavier than necessary. The sound of the ladle scraping the bottom of the pot and then continuing. The way the cook wiped his hands on his apron and leaned back, unhurried. No one counted portions. That was new. In Germany, food had always been counted, measured, logged, divided, with eyes watching. Here, the counting had stopped. One woman decided to test the limit. She finished her plate and waited, hands flat on the table. The guard came by. More? He asked. She nodded once. The ladle dipped again. No glance at her body. No comment on her appetite. No warning. The second serving landed with a soft, final sound. She stared at it. Her first thought was not pleasure. It was panic. If this continues, I will forget how to be careful. Across the table, another woman ate slowly, deliberately. She stopped halfway through her second portion and pushed the tray away. Her stomach was full. Her mind was not ready. At night, the conversations shifted. They no longer asked, "Is this allowed?" They asked, "How long do you think this lasts?" "Until the war ends," one woman said. "Or until they stop pretending," another answered. No one knew which answer felt worse. Being allowed to eat until full began to change the body before the mind could object. Work details became easier, hands steadier, steps firmer. One woman realized she could carry a crate without stopping to breathe. Another noticed she no longer planned each movement around weakness. Small changes, quiet ones. That created another problem. Visibility. Fuller faces were harder to hide. One woman stood in front of the barracks window and caught her reflection. Her cheeks had softened slightly. Color had returned. She turned away. Back home, being thin meant being normal. Being thin meant belonging. Here, thinness marked them as newly arrived. The rules had reversed. At lunch the next day, she took only one serving. The guard noticed. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. He moved on without comment. No pressure. No suspicion. The choice was hers. That autonomy unsettled her more than force ever had. The women began to eat differently from one another. Some finished everything, every time. Some stopped early. Some alternated, as if balancing invisible scales. Being allowed to eat until full did not create equality. It created mirrors. Each woman saw herself more clearly. Guilt arrived quietly. It appeared between bites. My family is hungry. The thought came without warning. One woman pushed her bread toward the center of the table, then stopped. Sharing was not permitted. She stared at the untouched slice. Her mouth watered. She ate it. The shame came later. Letters began arriving irregularly. Thin envelopes, censored lines, familiar handwriting grown careful. One letter mentioned potatoes. Another mentioned turnips. Another mentioned nothing at all. Silence said more. That night, a woman folded her letter carefully and slid it under her mattress. The next morning, she ate her full portion anyway. She hated herself for it. Her body did not care. By the third week, the cooks no longer watched the women eat. They talked among themselves, joked quietly, drank coffee. The meals had lost their tension. That was the real shift. Being allowed to eat until full had become background noise. And background noise shapes behavior. One woman found herself saving bread crusts out of habit, hiding them in her sleeve. By evening, she realized she had no reason to. She threw them away. The act felt like betrayal. Another woman stopped dreaming about food altogether. Her dreams returned to streets, faces, sounds she had not heard in months. This disturbed her more than hunger dreams ever had. Hunger kept the past close. Fullness allowed distance. During one meal, a guard dropped his fork. It clattered loudly on the floor. Every woman flinched. Then nothing happened. The guard laughed, picked it up, rinsed it, and sat back down. The moment passed, but something had shifted. Fear no longer controlled their reactions. That frightened them deeply, because fear had been their last protection. The women began to notice something else. The Americans were not watching to see how much they ate. They were watching to see if order held. Trays returned, floors clean, no fights. The system trusted itself. And it trusted them. That trust felt undeserved. One woman whispered during dinner, "Maybe they feed us because they are not afraid of us." No one answered. The idea was too large to touch. Being allowed to eat until full had stopped feeling like generosity. It felt like confidence. That was harder to accept. On the 20th day, one woman declined the second serving again. This time, another woman leaned close and whispered, "Take it." "Why?" she asked. "Because it's there," came the answer. She took it. She ate it. That night, she slept without waking. The repetition continued. Meals. Second servings. No comment. The days stacked quietly on top of one another. Being allowed to eat until full did not shatter their beliefs. It wore them down. And that erosion was irreversible. Because once the body learns safety, the mind follows slowly, reluctantly. And the next day, it happened again. The comparison did not arrive as anger. It arrived as arithmetic. At breakfast, one woman noticed the bread was cut evenly, each slice the same thickness. No one watched which hand took which piece. She held her slice in both palms, warm, soft. At home, bread had been broken, not cut. One half became two, two became four. Eyes did the measuring when scales were gone. She swallowed and did not rush. The coffee was hot. Steam rose freely. Back home, fuel had been saved. Pots were pulled early from the fire. Warmth rationed like food. Here, heat was not guarded. That difference followed them through the day. At lunch, the pot came back around. Again. Being allowed to eat until full no longer startled them. It invited comparison. One woman counted ladles without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, then stopped when the pot did not empty. She pictured a kitchen with no pot at all. Another woman slowed her eating deliberately, spacing bites as if someone else might arrive late and need time. No one did. The benches stayed full. The tables stayed set. The room smelled of beans and bread, a steady smell, reliable. Reliability sharpened the contrast. Letters arrived twice that week. Thin envelopes, censored lines, familiar handwriting grown smaller. We traded furniture. The children are thin. Winter will be worse. They learned quickly not to read before meals. A full stomach made the words heavier. One woman folded her letter into a square so small it disappeared into her palm. She sat long after the trays were cleared, staring at the grain of the wood. If she closed her eyes, she could almost forget the camp. But she could not forget the table. Being allowed to eat until full anchored her to the present in a way hunger never had. Hunger always pointed elsewhere, to the next meal, to tomorrow. Fullness fixed her in place. That made comparison unavoidable. One afternoon, a woman overheard a guard talking about home. "My wife made stew last night," he said. "Too much. We'll eat it again tonight." The words, "too much," lingered. The woman turned away. At home, too much had vanished years ago. At dinner, the second serving appeared again. This time, fewer women hesitated. The hesitation had moved. It now lived in memory. One woman finished her plate and sat back, hands resting on her stomach. She felt solid, present. She imagined her sister at a table with an empty plate, pretending not to notice. The thought stung, but it did not stop her from eating. That contradiction exhausted her. At night, conversations grew quieter. They spoke of home in fragments now, careful not to linger. "My town is gone. My father hasn't written. We had soup yesterday." Those sentences did not ask for answers. The meals continued. Always enough. The women noticed changes in themselves. Cheeks fuller, steps easier, sleep deeper. One woman caught her reflection in a window and turned away. Visibility felt dangerous. At home, being thin meant normal. Being thin meant belonging. Here, thinness marked you as newly arrived. The comparison inverted everything. One woman began leaving a piece of bread untouched at each meal. The same piece, the same place. It became her marker. Proof she could stop. Proof abundance had not erased restraint. One day, the bread was cleared before she could look at it again. She felt a flash of panic she could not explain. That night, she dreamed of a table stretching across a ruined street. People sat on both sides. Some ate, some watched. She woke unsettled. The comparison was no longer intellectual. It was physical. It sat in the stomach, in the hands, in the pause before swallowing. Being allowed to eat until full created a line they crossed daily. On one side, survival. On the other, memory. They carried both. And soon, the comparison would stop whispering. The realization did not arrive as a sentence. It arrived as quiet. One morning, a woman reached for the second serving without thinking. Her hand moved first. The ladle dipped. Stew filled the bowl. She paused. Not in fear. Not in guilt. In recognition. This was normal now. The thought settled without words. Around the room, the same stillness appeared. No one looked up. No one checked faces. Being allowed to eat until full had stopped asking for attention. And that was when it became heavy. They began to notice how their bodies moved on their own, sitting longer, standing straighter, breathing deeper. Strength returned without permission. One woman realized she no longer thought about food between meals. The hours had space again. That space frightened her. Hunger had been a guide, a distraction, an excuse. Without it, other things returned. Memory, sharp and detailed. She remembered her last meal at home. Thin soup, no bread, the sound of spoons stopping early. The contrast did not make her angry. It made her tired. At lunch, a woman folded her napkin carefully and placed it beside her tray, edges aligned. She stared at the empty bowl. She understood something without forming words. This is what safety feels like. The idea tightened her chest. Safety had been for others, civilians, children, the victorious. Not prisoners, not enemies. Yet here it was. Not announced, not praised, just present. Another woman finished eating and stayed seated. Her hands rested on the table. She closed her eyes for a moment. She felt full, not just fed, present in her body. She imagined her sister at home, standing in line, eyes fixed on the ground, hoping the pot would not be empty. The image hurt, but it did not undo the fullness. That was the realization. Food here did not cancel hunger elsewhere. It existed beside it. The women stopped speaking about this shift. Words felt unnecessary. Speaking would have required judgment. Silence allowed coexistence. The guards did not comment, or perhaps they noticed and chose not to. Meals continued. The same question each time. More? The answers came easily now. Yes. No. Not today. Each answer accepted. Choice returned in small, contained ways. One woman decided she would always finish her tray. If she was alive, she would stay that way. Another continued to stop early. She needed the line. Neither was corrected. That absence of correction mattered. No one here required them to perform hunger. No one asked for gratitude. The food did not argue. It waited. At night, a woman lay awake listening to wind move through the wire. The sound was low, steady. She pressed her hand to her stomach. Warm, heavy. She thought, when this ends, I will remember this more clearly than the bombs. The realization did not soften her view of the war. It sharpened it. It clarified what had been taken. And what had been withheld? What could be provided? What had been chosen elsewhere? She did not need to say this aloud. None of them did. Because the understanding had already spread. Quietly. Irreversibly. And the next day, the meals continued. Years later, the memory did not return as faces. It returned as a tray. Metal, scratched, slightly bent at one corner. In the years after the war, when life became busy and loud again, that was what surfaced first. Not the fences, not the guards. The tray. One woman remembered lifting it with both hands, surprised by its weight, not because it was heavy, but because it was full. Another remembered the sound it made when set down on the table, a dull, solid thud. Nothing fragile, nothing scarce. She would be standing in a kitchen decades later, stirring a pot, and suddenly feel that same weight in her hands. Fullness, not abundance, not luxury. Enough. The war receded in memory the way storms do, still violent, but distant. What remained close were the small routines. The line, the steam, the question. More? Some of them never spoke about this part. When asked about captivity, they described work details, inspections, paperwork. They mentioned fences. They rarely mentioned food. Because describing it sounded wrong. Because saying, we were allowed to eat until full, felt like a betrayal of those who hadn't. And yet, privately, the memory stayed. One woman noticed she always filled plates evenly at home. She never served herself first. Another always left a small piece of bread on the table after meals, just in case. They did not teach these habits. They lived them. Children noticed. Sometimes. Why do you do that? She would shrug. I like to see it there. No explanation. No story. The body remembered even when words failed. At reunions, some women finally spoke to each other about it. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Matter of fact, do you remember the second serving? Yes. I stopped asking after a while. Me too. They shared these lines quietly, like coordinates. They did not need agreement, only recognition. One woman visited America again, many years later. A short trip, a different life. In a diner, The waitress set down a plate and asked the familiar question. Want more? The woman froze. The room blurred slightly. She looked at the plate. Eggs, toast, coffee. She was not hungry. But the question reached past the decades. She answered softly. No. Thank you. And felt the same calm she had felt then. Choice. Not survival. Not fear. Just choice. That was what lasted. Not the kindness itself, but the fact that it was quiet, unannounced, offered without demand. When the women were old, when the war had become a chapter instead of a presence, they still remembered that first week, not as comfort, as contradiction. Enemies who did not starve them, guards who did not count bites, a system that asked nothing when giving enough. The memory did not argue. It simply remained. A full tray, an empty stomach no longer feared, a question that did not punish the answer. More? The tray was empty, and that was enough.